back to what is typical, like the purpose of the transportation system is to connect people to jobs and essential services.
Right.
It's helping young Beth Osborne in law school reach that job. And without me having to pay a cover charge to enter into the economy. And if you look at the measures we use, they're 1950s measures. And even in the 1950s, if you read academic studies on what we should be measuring, it was whether or not people can get to things, which is not just speed, it's speed and distance. But we didn't have the capacity to run those numbers for millions of potential trips between, a nearly unlimited set of origins and destinations. So what we did, which was smart, is we said we're adding an amenity, that is this highway system, and we're going to speed up traffic. Does increasing that speed with everything else remaining the same save time? Can we use that as a proxy? Sure. The problem is the way we increased speeds was we cut off other travel and we made those trips impossible or longer by a long shot. And we took away, while we were giving new ways of travel, we swept away other ways of travel.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Active Towns channel. My name is John Simmerman, and that is the one and only Beth Osborne, Director of Transportation for America, a program of Smart Growth America. And we're going to be diving into the initiatives and programs that they provide to help understand and promote for a better use of our transportation dollars so that we have a system that is safer and more effective. And before we dive into all that, I did want to say, if you're enjoying this content here on the Active Towns channel, please consider supporting my efforts by becoming an Active Towns ambassador. Super easy to do and very much appreciated. Just click on the join button right here on YouTube or navigate over to activetowns.org. Click on the support tab at the top of the page and there's several different options. Okay, let's get right to it with Beth. Beth Osborne, thank you so much for joining me on the Active Towns podcast. This has been a long time coming.
It has. Thank you so much for inviting me.
You are quite welcome. And yes, I joke about this, that it's been a long time coming. You and I have been sending messages kind of back and forth over the last couple of years trying to get you here on the pod. I definitely wanted to get you on the pod because so much is happening at the federal level right now. But what I would love for you to do, for those people who are not super familiar with who you are, please just take a moment to introduce yourself. So who the heck is Beth Osborne?
That's a question for the ages. Right now, I am the Vice President for Transportation and Thriving Communities at Smart Growth America. We're a national nonprofit that focuses on the role the built environment plays in creating communities that are healthy, prosperous, and resilient. My team, the transportation team, is made up of organizations people might know of as the National Complete Streets Coalition, which is a project of Smart Growth America, and Transportation for America. And as a transportation team, what we're trying to accomplish is a transportation system that connects people to jobs and essential services. Seems pretty baseline, but we want to make sure that that works as well for people in and out of a car, no matter how much money they earn and no matter their physical abilities. And right now, it doesn't work particularly well for people in a car with a lot of money and fully mobile. So we have a long way to go. I'm happy to talk about my past, but just kind of in a quick review. Before I was at Smart Growth America, I worked at the U.S. Department of Transportation under President Obama, and before that worked on Capitol Hill for Senator Tom Carper from Delaware. And I bounced around D.C., worked for different nonprofits and House members. But so I've been here and working in this space for quite some time. The next transportation authorization bill will be my 6th.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
And so
I don't know if you know this, but I'm based in Austin, Texas, and that's where I've been for the last decade. Prior to that, I lived on the Big Island in Hawaii. So I was in Hawaii Island for about a decade prior to moving here. And I can do active towns anywhere. So it doesn't matter where I'm located. I've been doing this off and on, or really pretty much on ever since about 2011, and really honing in on the content creation over the last 6, 7, 8 years, etc. But yeah, you're originally from a little bit down south here in my neck of the woods, sort of. Yeah, just across the way.
Yeah, I'm a native New Orleanian. I went
Yeah.
to New Orleans, went to Ben Franklin High School, and then I went to LSU for undergrad and law school. I don't tend to admit to the law degree very often, but I utilize it to talk innocent young folks out of making the same mistake I did. And I have about like an 80% record in talking people out of law school. So I'm very proud.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I'm going to pop on over here to your LinkedIn page. Again, you've got the splash page here, Transportation for America, a program of Smart Growth America. You had mentioned that your official title is Vice President for Smart Growth America, and you were really a director of the Transportation for America. What's the history of that sort of entity that is Transportation for America? Has it always been part of Smart Growth America, or is it gone
It
through?
was originally created as an independent organization, as was the National Complete Streets Coalition, and they were brought under the Smart Growth umbrella. Just from a programmatic perspective, it's hard to talk about effective city building and community building without transportation. Since it unfortunately wrecks the best plans. So getting it under control and making it something that is coordinated with development, housing, land use policy is essential for having high quality of life and an effective transportation system. But also, frankly, from the perspective of running a nonprofit, it's easier to run a slightly large nonprofit where people share a lot of the administration than have a lot of little bitty small nonprofits that are kind of next to each other but not fully coordinated.
Right. Yeah. No, I hear you. And if we head on over to the website for Transportation for America, here we see this. And so t4america.org is the actual URL, and you're here. And so it does have its own identity and visual, but I'm assuming that if we were going to the landing page for Smart Growth America, we could easily click on a link that would get us to here. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I really appreciate you bringing up the website. This is brand spanking new. It's really a beta test phase right now. We're inviting anybody to play with it, to let us know if they find things that aren't working so that we can make tweaks and updates. And then I would love feedback on where we can take things from here. The big innovation on the website is this State of the System data hub, which is set up to allow people to figure out what we are currently getting for our transportation investment, and particularly on a state-by-state basis. We have it organized around our top 3 priorities right there, which is we believe in a fix-it-first approach to transportation. We should not be building things while other things are falling into disrepair. And when we build highways and transit and all such transportation investments, we should have a plan to maintain it throughout its useful life while maintaining the overall system. This is controversial in the transportation field, which is insane because it is basic responsibility and something that, frankly, a lot of the folks who are running the transportation program think that people should do in their personal lives. So I think the taxpayer should expect the same out of them. The second area is safety, and we particularly view safety through the concept of prioritizing safety over speed. Right now, we do the reverse. The goal is to let cars go fast, and we will make that as safe as possible, even though high-speed auto traffic in complex environments, whether you're talking about a rural town, Main Street or town center or an urban area, is inherently unsafe because there are so many potential points of conflict that you cannot see and avoid at speed. We want to see that reverse. We want safety first and speed second. And then the last is we've spent 100 years building out a highway system. And we think we now need an equal level of investment in the rest of the transportation system. We call it invest in the rest. So we would like to see the same focused, committed approach to building transit, intercity passenger rail, and active transportation as we have seen on the highway side.
Yeah, yeah. And what's really, really interesting when you look at these three focus areas and the buckets that they represent and the energy that they represent, it really is sort of mind-boggling that we found ourselves, the system sort of evolved into, focusing in on the things that it focused in on, focused in on just building new stuff instead of like figuring out, oh, by the way, make sure that, you are budgeting to be able to maintain these things. Oh, by the way, probably not the best idea to just focus in on motor vehicle speed, because then you get the expected result of 40,000 plus people perishing on our roads, not to mention the millions of serious injuries that happen, and then from an investment side is this focus in on, because of the focus in on speed, we end up seeing highway design standards applied to environments that's totally inappropriate. We're basically taking what we learned from building out the interstate network and saying, oh, wow, 14-foot lanes and high speeds. Let's apply that, which is great for getting through, massively rural environments, along an interstate, connecting cities. It's just asinine that we then took that technology, that knowledge of highway building, and applied it to environments where there's lots of squishy people, walking and biking and rolling around on wheelchairs. It's just insane.
There's an extra irony there. The whole point of the interstate system was there was an acknowledgement that it was patently insane to accommodate this kind of speed in the built environment, in the surface roads. Nobody would do something that stupid. What you do when you want to accommodate speed is you separate all the development from it, and you control when, where, and how people come into that environment and go out of it. It's called a controlled access road. And you don't let bicyclists and pedestrians near it. You don't have on-street parking. You don't have crossroads. And you don't have traffic directly oncoming. You have a separation from a median, or as those of us from New Orleans would call it, a neutral ground. And that is how you make speed safe. There is no other way for speed to be safe. So the very moment you allow high traffic or high speed traffic without those features, you are saying safety isn't a priority, full stop. And like you said so well, we've taken those standards and we are applying it in a one size fits all approach to every kind of roadway and street. And ironically, when we raise the changes that are needed, we are told, pump the brakes there. We can't make changes in a one size fits all way, which is not what we're asking for. We are asking for there to be more of a context sensitive approach. Set speeds as is appropriate for the design and the purpose of the road and where it is in the community. And the people saying we're asking for a one size fits all approach are the ones that have mandated a one size fits all approach.
Yeah, yeah. You've probably noticed my coffee mug with Streets Are for People, and really it's kind of a disconnect between a highway a roadway that is designed to connect two people, two places from A to B as quickly and safely as possible versus a street environment where we have a richness of activities. The declarative statement of streets are for people, takes us back to what streets are for. And to paraphrase, Chuck Marohn from Strong Towns, it's like, this is the platform for building wealth and vitality and connecting people. It shouldn't be a traffic sewer.
Exactly. Well, and not only do I paraphrase Chuck all the time, I just out and out steal from him nonstop.
Yeah. He likes that.
And he puts it beautifully. So if you're not reading Chuck's books and webpage, you're missing out. And what's interesting, if you click on the data here under safety, so the dark red are the places that are less safe. This is particularly for pedestrians, and the pedestrian is the folks who demonstrate, sadly, by the giving of their own lives, the danger on the roadways first, and they're the ones that really show that with that high speed traffic, crashes are more likely to be deadly. What you will notice in that map. Oh, and here, so every web page or every state has a fact sheet on their performance in all of these areas. But we are looking at adding to this. So people should look at it and get a sense of what they might like to see added and improved, because this is our starting point, not our ending point. But here, if you look, you'll notice that the states that are the least safe are the states that saw most of their development happen in the 1950s and after, when we started building in the interstate era for people to be far apart from each other and far apart from everything they need. And through those development patterns, we knew we were creating a very inconvenient system for people. So we said, well, it will be inconvenient, but we'll let you drive fast between them. And then we all pretend to be shocked when that creates massive congestion, which is the only thing it could create.
Right. I'm looking at this one standout here on the eastern seaboard that is a dark red. What is this?
Well, a lot of Delaware was developed.
Delaware, yeah.
Yeah,
which
so you've got
you
Wilmington.
Have a bit of a connection to, I would assume, yeah?
I do have big. Yes, I'm a long time and permanent resident of Carpertown, which is what the alum are called. And if you get outside of Wilmington, everything downstate is new development, and it's built so that people can drive through communities quickly, but it is very hard to move around inside of a car.
And I think it's an interesting and tragic reality too. I grew up in a rural town in Northern California. At the time, we only had about 4,000 people living in the actual village, the town itself. It has since grown to, I think, 50,000. So it's grown quite a bit in the past few decades. But it was primarily like an agricultural type of town. I grew up on a small ranch a couple miles outside of the village, and it was easy to get into town and all of that. But one of the features that we had was a state highway running through it, and so many of our, especially western states and the Midwest cities, we did that. We took these wonderful, delightful, walkable villages and cities, and we rammed, state highways through them. And oftentimes they were like the historic Main Street, and we converted what was a wonderful shopping street, a high street, a street for people, and turned them into these traffic sewers. And so when we look at, that map, and we look at the realities from a political perspective of, red versus blue and right versus left, and we see the realities of many of our states, across a map that sort of looks like this. And we realize that an awful lot of these places have these small towns, cities, rural environments that have basically highway standards applied to their villages, their village streets, their city streets. And there's an awful lot of tension between, how do you handle that? Because it took what was probably pre-World War II, a wonderful, delightful little place, and turned it into, I wouldn't allow my kids to walk there, even though future generations walked and biked to school.
That's exactly right. What's interesting in that map is you will see California's pretty blue, except for it's incredibly unsafe in terms of pedestrian safety. New Mexico is very blue. Arizona's purple. North Carolina is, and Delaware are blue. And then you go to the areas doing better, and you've got very, very red areas that are in much lighter coloring. And a lot of that, there's several factors. One is a bunch of the Midwest and Northeast were built before the highways. And frankly, I think and we're looking to do this, you do a study of the cities versus their suburbs, you'll find that their suburbs look as bad as anything. And it's those older areas that are doing better in terms of pedestrian safety and overall safety for that matter. But you also will find that areas that were too poor to spend the money to blow out all of those main streets are safer. And so there are a lot of areas where the rural Main Street remains due to lack of funds, but that has saved it from the danger that comes with turning a main street into a highway. When I was a kid, we left New Orleans for a little while and moved to a little town in West Virginia called Ravenswood, West Virginia. And when I was there from when I was 7 to 10, and I could walk everywhere in Ravenswood. It's a teeny tiny town. I think at its height, it was 5,000 people when Kaiser Aluminum's would own the main bauxite plant there and was operating. Now I think it's half that much. But I went back with my best friend from when I grew up there last summer, and the main street has been blown out. It's a wider road. It has resulted in a lot of the old buildings being converted into more sprawl type development with them backed up behind parking lots, more fast food restaurants with drive-throughs than the old buildings and businesses. And even where the old businesses exist, they're closed. I mean, there's empty. And I'm sure since I was there, all of that was done for the economic good of the community, but there's not a lot of community wealth being built there. It's just places for people to stop when they get through this town that the state has pretty much indicated to people that they shouldn't worry themselves with because they don't need to slow down as they blast through there. And I was not comfortable walking. I was comfortable walking through the community without sidewalks in many places when I was 7, but now, even with a sidewalk, I was not very comfortable.
Yeah, and that brings us really, to this particular slide deck that we have here, on this state of the system and looking at safety, is that we should be designing for safety over speed. When we say this makes intuitive sense. Why wouldn't we be doing this? But you had said it earlier, we haven't been doing this. We've been sort of prioritizing and bowing down to the god of LOS, level of service, of trying to push as many motor vehicles through these areas as possible. And I'm not talking about the interstate system. I'm not talking about highways, but I am talking about these more complicated and complex environments where we have destinations nearby. And we've, again, applied these highway standards to what should be streets, that have a richness of destinations. And we've been prioritizing, speed. And through that prioritization, as we mentioned earlier, of treating and applying highway standards, we've created what Chuck has coined a strode. We've created a street road hybrid, and it's been designed for speed, not safety. How do we flip that script? How do we do this? Design for safety over speed.
Yeah, and Chuck talks about it beautifully, but you do have to pick. Is this a locally serving street, or is this a throughway, a road? And if it's a throughway, if it's a road, just like the brilliant people back in the 40s and 50s that wanted to build the limited access highways, the controlled access highways, the way you do speed is you reduce all of your conflict points. So you don't have driveways and cross streets and street parking and all the places that create a potential conflict. If you're going to have lots of points of conflict, because you do have cross streets and driveways and pedestrian crossings and businesses and things like that, then the speeds just have to come way down. And that's it. There's no in between. The in between is where everything stops working. The traffic doesn't flow well, and the safety is a disaster. And that's what we've done in these states that, well, in every community that's been built since the highway era, we're trying to bring highway designs into complex environments, which is exactly the reason we built the interstate, is we knew we couldn't do that safely. We knew it. We just chose to forget that. And some of it is we created highway programs and highway agencies to build the interstates, and then we added to their purview, but we didn't give them strict direction on how to handle those additions. So they just applied what they knew to everything we gave them. We even apply it to transit. So we look at the speed of travel from the beginning of a transit route to the end of a transit route. Almost nobody goes from the beginning to the end of a transit route, and the speed is not the point. It's kind of in the point, but the real point is that the service is reliable and it goes where you need it to go. And so long as it's not bogged down to almost, no speed, that's almost incidental. But we're taking those highway standards and we're applying it here because it's all we know. And what we need for safety, we need to recognize that a driver loses their field of vision the faster they go. So the faster they're going, the narrower their field of vision. With a narrow field of vision, it means you're not going to spot those points of potential conflict. And then when you do, it's too late to stop or avoid it. So that leads to more crashes, more high injury crashes, and more deadly crashes. And then what happens if you look at the forms that police have to fill out? They have to assign blame, and no place in that blame is the designer of the roadway who set the driver up to fail. And even worse, it is policymakers who took that driver's money, that driver's hard-earned money in the form of gas taxes. And these days, the gas tax doesn't pay for the program anymore because the program's grown beyond the gas taxes. We take their income taxes and all kinds of other fees as well, and debt, and we use it to build something that when it predictably fails, we blame the people paying for the system.
Right.
It's really horrifying.
Yeah, you put a lot in there. I don't think we can unpack all the little niggles that you put in there, but I did want to emphasize the fact that the graph that we've been looking at, the map that we've been looking at, really hones in on the pedestrian experience. So this is the pedestrian deaths that we're looking at here. If we looked at a similarly colored graph that looked at overall crash statistics and injuries and fatalities and crashes that happen with people on bikes, it would probably be very, very similar. But I just want to emphasize that this particular data that we have been looking at has been the pedestrian experience. We mentioned it earlier in terms of we have to start fixing things first. We can't just keep, pushing out these federal dollars that go out to then filter down to the state level and the MPOs and everything else to then just keep building new stuff. What else do we need to talk about by fixing it first and what we mean by fixing it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. There are a bunch of things that can make this a little bit more complex, but let's start with what's easy. We have a very built out system. It's a robust system and it costs a lot of money to maintain. According to federal highways, it's about $24,000 per lane mile of highway. And we have billions of lane miles. So it's a lot of money. And right now, we see states spending about a third of their federal dollars, and we have not been able to dive into all the state spending, but we hope to, on building more new things. So either expanding a roadway or creating a new stretch of roadway. And all of that is happening while they have other roads or bridges that are in disrepair. The bridges might be, either closed or up for repair or weight restricted. The roads are full of bumps that shouldn't be there. And they're saying, we need you to give us more money to repair our roads. But then when we give them that money, they don't necessarily spend it on that. They spend it on new assets that become liabilities. And they never look at it as a liability, and they don't plan for it. And quite frankly, just in terms of the way society works, if you build something new, it doesn't tend to interfere with existing roadways and existing commerce, and it is less inconvenient than maintenance. Maintenance drives people nuts. It slows them down. It's a hassle. It creates detours. All those sorts of things. And so you can deliver something brand new and you get praise. The press praises you. You get to have a big event. You get to have multiple events. You get to have an event when you start your construction. You get to have an event when you open it. But when you do maintenance, my friends at Taxpayers for Common Sense say it's like flossing. It's this thing you got to do, but no one's excited about doing. But if you don't do it, your teeth fall out. So it is something we must do, but it's incredibly unpopular because it is inconvenient. And the politicians get beaten up during the whole thing because of the traffic backups. And then when you open, you're just giving people what they had before. And so we really need to build our programs in a way that strengthens the backbones of the agencies that we want to make the hard choice to maintain what they have and not reward them for failing to do so, which right now we practically do. That your failure to maintain your system is the reason why you should get more money.
Yeah. It's insidious. This particular graph here is honing in on an overview of the country and the states that have better or worse conditions when it comes to pavement conditions and the percentage of bridges in poor condition. Interestingly enough, North Dakota is in the number 2 spot nationally. What state is number 1 in terms of best conditions?
I'm not actually sure.
Well, it's obviously one of the very, very light colored ones. So maybe it's Nevada, which looks pretty light. Don't be confused, folks, by the darkness of the color of
it's
pointing. It's because it's selected. It's not because it's the worst. Yeah, I just want to make sure that people know that.
So North Dakota is number 2. I've actually spent time in Bismarck, and they just have a culture that backs them up, that says we can't build things we can't afford to maintain. So they really focus more naturally on maintenance of their system. We found some of the same thing in the past in Tennessee, but I think that they may not be quite as committed to it as they have been in the past. It's not clear to me. Tennessee is older, so they've got Memphis is older, and they're going to have more of a older system that is harder to maintain. So that can be a challenge. But my home state of Louisiana, amongst the worst.
In many ways, unfortunately. and so number 3 here, we're talking about this concept that we need to be investing in the rest. We need to be bold enough to take time to invest in the stuff that has been pushed to the side. And you've been very public and open about the fact that transit and walking and biking should not be, and the advocates that are clamoring to improve those conditions and investing in those conditions and making it more feasible for people to walk and bike and use transit. We should not be settling for tiny little kernels of this. I mean, you've been very, very public about the fact that we should not be just celebrating the fact that we got a fraction of a fraction of a fraction in the next reauthorization bill. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, there's a few things here. One is when the bipartisan infrastructure law was passed, the Biden administration celebrated that a historic amount of funding went into transit. What they didn't like to say is a historic amount of money went into everything. And transit was still pegged at the 20% of what highways got. That difference between transit and highways was a bargain that was made during the Reagan administration. That was the last time urban members of particularly the House of Representatives made any demands for improvements to the program. They said, we're not going to agree to a gas tax increase unless some of that money goes to transit. And then I think at the notion was that was a floor. As is so often the case, it becomes a ceiling. And it is pegged to 20% that of highways. So for transit to get one more federal dollar, you need to come up with 4 highway dollars. And that's the cost of admission. And I don't like the notion that transit advocates feel like they must support a program that creates danger for people trying to get to transit and makes transit work inefficiently in order to get their transit. And I hope that I can convince people that it's time to stop making that deal. In safety, we do that too. We say, okay, if you spend 6% of the funds on highway safety, we'll let you spend the rest on highway maybe safety, probably not. And that is a terrible deal. It'd be better to have none of it than have that situation. So I'm hoping to push people in that direction. And then I also just want to say my personal experience in this space is, growing up in a first-ring suburb of New Orleans, and I went to the best public school in the city, and frankly, one of the best schools, period, in the city. But it was a magnet school, and I lived on the West Bank. It was across the river, and I relied on a school bus to get there. But the state cut school bus funding for public schools, and high schools went first. And a bunch of folks were able to put together a bus through basically a charter system to get the kids from the West Bank across the river. But several parents couldn't because they couldn't afford to do that. And I saw a bunch of my friends who had been freshmen with me have to drop out of this fantastic school because they couldn't get there. And they didn't have a mom or a dad who could take time off to drive them in and go pick them up. The upperclassmen, their parents didn't have enough money to buy them a car to go to high school. And that was really impactful to me. And then when I went to LSU and I was in law school, I needed money to pay my way. So I wanted to get a job because I didn't have enough money to make ends meet, but I couldn't get a job that I could get to without a car. But I couldn't afford to go buy a car. I already couldn't make my ends meet without a job. So no job without a car, no car without a job was really an eye-opening experience to me. And Baton Rouge just did not have decent transit. The transit didn't go many places. It didn't operate at all times of day. It didn't operate frequently. I think that you could say fairly that is still the case. And walking or biking, I did try biking. I tried that once, almost died several times on one trip and decided that wasn't a good plan. And so when I moved to DC, my parents did eventually get me a used car. They could buy me out of the situation, an incredibly efficient way for our economy to operate. And when I moved to DC, I got rid of that car, and that paid my way to be able to get started here. And I didn't have to buy a car for many, many years. And instead, I invested my money in savings, in travel, in buying a home, and was able to be building wealth before my husband, who works for the FBI, in their infinite wisdom, they moved their counterterrorism operations out to a place that was not served by transit, which we dealt with until We had kids, and he would need to get to the kids if I was out of town. And it just wasn't reliable. So we finally purchased a car 11 years later, and I view that to this day as a pay cut, courtesy of the FBI.
Yeah. Now, we've been lingering on this version of the map, which is titled Invest in Options. And when at first glance on this, I'm like, oh, interesting, Utah doing quite well here. But then I also realized that really this is an indictment of the entire country of how low the investment in other mobility options really is. What would you like to say additionally about this particular map?
You hit the nail on the head. There are three things we're measuring here: spending per capita on transit, a comparison of road expansion versus transit, just to give you a sense of the focus of dollars, and spending on bike ped infrastructure. And Utah's doing comparatively well on bike ped and on transit, but they're spending way, way more on highways. So it's a really interesting state. The state is heavily involved. I believe it's a state agency that handles transit. They have a really strong commitment to transit from their legislature. And as a result, they've made some amazing investments over the last 25 years. And Utah often surprises people, but this is a state, particularly in the Salt Lake area, really across the state, people move there because they want to be outdoors and they want to be active. And so they not only focus on bike ped infrastructure, but really trails so that people can go out and bike and run and be active and hike. But you're right, nationwide, even the communities and the states that are doing well in this space are not doing well compared to even our neighbors to the north and across the country and much poorer countries. And another thing I find very interesting is one of the biggest excuses for that is the excuse is shortened to be, oh, but rural. That's the excuse. Oh, but rural, which means I don't like what you're talking about, and I don't think rural America probably does either, so I'm not going to engage any further. In reality, really in the United States, we don't think much of rural areas, or at least our elected representatives don't. And what I find is elected representatives from rural areas think the least of those rural areas. When they say, oh, rural areas don't need this, what they're really saying, whether they know it or not, is American rural areas don't deserve this. Only cities deserve amenities. Rural areas, you're not going to give that to them. They're not going to have their own medical clinics. They're not going to have their own groceries. And they're certainly not going to have transit that gets them to the places where those things exist. And if you go to other countries, their rural areas do have transit, and some have rail transit. And so it really shows the difference between countries that care about having thriving rural areas versus the United States that loves to laud rural areas, but then give them nothing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned, that a lot of rural areas and smaller villages and cities in other countries. I spend a lot of time over in Europe and a lot of time in the Netherlands. And I'm just always blown away by the empowerment of mobility choices that I have. If I want to go to a village or a city that is, 10 or 20 kilometers away, I can either choose to jump on the train and, make my way there, jump on a bus and make my way there, or jump on my bike, which is what I usually do, and ride there because I know that there is a safe and inviting separated Fietsstraat, which is a bicycle priority street, or Fietspad, which is a bicycle path that can get me there easily, comfortably, safely, all ages and abilities facilities. And then finally, yes, the mobility choice of if I were to get in an automobile, I really haven't ever rented a car there, so I've never had the need to drive a car there. But if I so chose to do that, or if I was catching a ride with a friend who happened to have a car, there's that option there. So really what we're talking about is the a plethora of mobility options. And that, I think, is part of what we should be expecting when we as voters are like realizing what our tax dollars are going towards from a transportation perspective. We should be like really excited and demand that we get those mobility options there, because in my mind, there's nothing that really resonates more with our values of freedom and independence than having mobility choice. The ability to choose how I want to get to my destination.
No, it's wild. There's been quite a trick played on us to get us to talk ourselves into a deprivation mindset. We will give up more of our money to get less. And we'll just hope, oh, please, 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 just maybe 2 more lanes in my life might be slightly less miserable in terms of travel. But, I wouldn't dream of asking for my community to have safe roads that I could let my kids, walk to school in. And yes, maybe some big old cities have that, but it could never happen here. And, just people should think about whether or not they should allow their tax dollars to go to a program that is constantly telling you that you don't deserve to have everything that, the most wonderful communities have. And I, I also find it just an incredibly cruel trick to say that the way we'll define freedom is restricting you to getting around in an extraordinarily expensive machine that loses value the second you sign on the dotted line to buy it. That is not freedom. That is the opposite of freedom. But we've taught you that that being jailed is freedom.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of money to be made, and there was a lot of framing in the early days. Peter Norton has done a great job of, as a historian, of going back and looking at motordom in the early stages, and then Grant Ennis has done a great job of exposing the way that the very powerful PR interests have reframed that message in his book, Dark PR. And so, yeah, we've been sold a bill of goods, and now it's like freedom in some weird way, as you mentioned, equates being dependent on one mode of transport, which is just bizarre. I've got a couple of pie charts pulled up here. So speaking of our tax dollars and speaking of how that all gets divvied up, walk us through the IIJA here and what this really represents.
Yeah, so this is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act passed in the fall of 2021, also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. So you'll see that the surface transportation portion makes up just over half of that pie chart. And it breaks down into the overwhelming majority going to highways, transit pegged to about 20% of the highway spending. What's really shocking, what the big change was the 20% or the equal amount of funding that goes to transit going to intercity passenger rail. That is gobsmacking. Now, you don't make things happen just by pouring money in. And a lot of the rail funding has been bottled up due to the fact that we don't have the infrastructure and the skill sets to really do this yet. And we're dealing with a network that is partially public and partially privately owned by the Class 1 rails. Within the highway program, I don't think a lot of people understand how it's broken up, because they hear about the programs that the US DOT and Secretary Buttigieg bragged about, which is things like the carbon reduction program. Now, I will give your viewers a moment to try and find that slice of the pie, because it's not easy to find. But it is a little bitty light orange slice up at the top, and it makes up 2% of the spending. There is also a resilience program that is the red slice next to the carbon reduction program. The highway safety program, slightly more at about 6%. That's a light blue. But you can see that there's a bunch of programs that people were excited about, and they're itty bitty slices. And then there are two gigantic slices called the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program, which can fund literally any kind of surface transportation project you can imagine. That's anything that's eligible any place else in the law. And the National Highway Performance Program, which is the program that the state DOTs jealously protect because that's where they fund their big highway projects out of. And the deal that folks that would like to see a better performing transportation program produce is, if you give me my tiny slice, I will let you have the rest to do whatever you want with. And the results that we've gotten for that is horrifying. We have laid out, there's a bunch of different priorities we've talked about over the last 35 years since our current program has meshed. The 4 priorities are safety. We're going to improve safety. We're going to improve the condition of the roadways. We are going to reduce congestion, and we are going to reduce emissions. Now, that third one, we're going to reduce congestion. I want to point out that in the effort to make cars move fast and reduce congestion, that is the biggest excuse to not do any of the other things, because all those other things are seen as interfering with or taking away from the effort to move vehicles quickly. What's interesting is we are either doing barely as well, we're just kind of holding steady, we're doing poorly, or we're doing very, very poorly in those 4 areas. And so one of the questions I have for my partners in the field and the public at large is, if after 30 plus years of spending, $1.5 trillion of investment, if we're going to do this badly across the board, why are we doing this? We're spending our money to get terrible, terrible results. And it would be better to do no harm at this point. And I think that scares a lot of people to say. It does not scare me, because I think we're getting the leftovers, we're getting the crumbs, and we're calling that a success. And so long as we're happy with crumbs, we kind of deserve what we get, which is nothing.
Which is nothing.
This is safety. We've gotten dangerous roads. So, you can see, if you go back before 2010, you will see in general that things were getting marginally more safe, sort of. It was looking more safe mostly from the perspective of how many people were dying on our roadways when compared to how many miles were being driven on our roadways. That is not a Vision Zero approach. That's saying, well, if people drive more, what can you do? People are just going to die, which is, why would you give hundreds of billions of dollars to any agency that says, what can you do? But that is a bipartisan approach. It's like, well, what can you do? Let's give them more money. They can't do anything about it, but give them more money.
Yeah. And to be fair, too, if we really go back in time, like 50 years to the 1970s, I think is when it was peaking at over 40,000, which was the last time we were over 40,000. We did see a lot of safety improvements. We saw seatbelts being required. We saw anti-lock brakes. We saw a whole bunch of tweaks that made the actual tool, the vehicle, incrementally safer and safer and safer. And then, yes, we saw that cascading of the net number of deaths decreasing, while at the same time we also saw a lot of increase in overall speeds. We saw the 55 mile per hour speed limit that was set for, when was that? Was that
several decades, right?
Yeah, it was several decades ago. It was primarily to try to save gas.
Late 90s, right?
Yeah, through the late 90s. And then we started driving faster and faster and faster out on the open roadways. But more importantly, we also, as the decades continued and we continued to apply highway standards to our city streets and our residential streets, we started seeing more and more vehicles traveling faster and faster and faster. And so we hit the trough, and then we started climbing in terms of the number of deaths again happening overall. But we also are seeing, as we get into the 2020s here, we also see the relative percentage of people who are perishing out on our roadways increasing in our more vulnerable road users, which is one of the reasons why we were looking at the data of, pedestrian fatalities and pedestrian injuries in crashes, et cetera. A lot of things have changed. There's a lot of moving parts here, including the bloat of vehicles and blah, blah, blah. So we can't obviously cover these all. Yeah. Yeah.
But I think some of the things that are important to really put a fine point on is what we do first with the crashes is we say, well, it was a person's fault. They did something stupid. In a world of vision zero, the idea is humans will be humans and you design for them, recognizing they might make foolish decisions from time to time. You don't just say, oh, those stupid people deserve to die. But what happens in the US is once you've gone through all of that blame the human side and you can't rely on that anymore, is you finally say, fine, make the vehicle manufacturers do it. And that's what we did in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. When I was on Capitol Hill, we did another round of it. I guess we started it when I was on Capitol Hill, and then when I was at USDOT, we required backup cameras and had roof crush standards and things like that to keep people even safer. But at the same time, we were making the outside of the vehicle less safe and doing exactly what I was saying, making roads in complicated areas wider, straighter, faster. And so more mistakes were likely to be made. And even though I had been told from the beginning of actually jump back one more, even though I'd been told that if people drive more, traffic fatalities go up, and when they drive less, they go down. Then COVID hit and traffic went way down and fatalities went way up. And that was because we exposed what over-engineered roads do. They encourage high-speed travel. They encourage people to drive the design speed. And the design speed of the road speed that the designers expected people to be able to go, is not the same as the posted speed. And that's another trick we play on our taxpayers, is we say, we're going to tell you from the design of the roadway that it's safe to go 50, but we're going to mark it 30. And when you mess up, we're going to fine you. And every American, even people that don't specialize in design or transportation, know what that's called. And it's called a speed trap. And yet we allow transportation agencies to continue to do that. So we saw this massive increase of fatalities, and now you hear people celebrating that we've come down to still higher than anything we've seen for decades, because it's less than it was, and that's all it takes. As long as it was less than last year, it doesn't matter if it's historically appalling.
Yeah. Well, and you really touch upon a very, very important point that I want to emphasize here, and we talk about it a lot on the channel, is the fact that we've seen this. We've seen the fact that we've blamed the nut behind the wheel. We blame the people who are the victims of these. We've fine-tuned the equipment and all the technology and the whiz bangs that we have been putting into our tool, our vehicle itself. But the one thing that we don't do that other countries do that really truly embrace a safe systems approach, a Vision Zero approach, is we don't take a step back and say, maybe it's the actual roadway that needs to be addressed. Maybe that's what we need to be addressing, is that built environment. You so eloquently expressed it, is that what's the design speed of this? Is this a dangerous by design intersection? Do we need to put a pause on this and to paraphrase, Wes Marshall, take a look at the transportation engineering that was involved. Was this caused by the engineering that we have applied to this? There's a real reluctance to doing that, because there's a real, I want to even say that there's almost a conspiracy of efforts that are in place to not question the design of the roadway, of the streets, of the intersections, because to admit to that we built it wrong, we built it so that it would cause this carnage, seems like we're admitting guilt.
Yes, and we may need to help them along by making that happen. It might involve lawsuits. Right now, there's more fear of being sued for not following the standard than being sued because your design killed people.
Exactly. Exactly. And Wes did a great job in his book, Killed by a Traffic Engineer, to really highlight the fact that those standards, when you really look into it, were pretty much just made up.
But of course they were. We had to start someplace, and the engineers that were a part of creating the system originally were just trying to start someplace. They didn't expect that it would become biblical, but it did. And so here you also see, I stole this from the American Society of Civil Engineers, who I think do a great job of showing that our road condition has really stayed almost the same over the last 25 years. If you go back and look at their 2001 report, I think the roads got a D. So they've elevated to a whole D plus, which is pitiful. And then if you go down to bridges, the bridges, they've just been a C, nonstop. They haven't really improved at all. The poor condition is just almost the same. And again, it's too much fun to build new stuff, and it's hard. It's hard to replace things. And so this shows you where the money is going, and that big red slice is new stuff because that's fun. And that's all the new liabilities that we're going to have to pay for when we can't afford to pay for what we already have. And again, that leads to emissions, because the more you build, the more people drive, the more there are emissions. And so we are looking at a massive increase in emissions because the bipartisan infrastructure bill that was supposed to bring down emissions. Kind of the old school, traditional Democratic position is, well, we'll just change the drivetrain in cars and buses and things and trucks, and it will fix it. But that's not how it works. If you force people to keep driving and you keep taking away space from getting away in any other way and making more space for driving, you're going to have a massive increase in emissions in the short term. And you're going to continue to have a big amount of pollutants that cause damage to human health, because the brakes and the tires and the pavement itself will let off emissions that, make kids sick. And there's this attitude of yes, we'll build our transit and you can build your highways. And that last graph that you just had shows why that doesn't work, because yes, you've got this much benefit, but it's overwhelmed by this much harm. And that's just the science of it. And so you end up with that gray slice of increases in emissions. And all of this is done because we've got to deal with the traffic that we have created by building a transportation system where you can only get around by one means, and a land use system that puts everything you need in the least convenient places possible. Couldn't possibly give you a grocery store anywhere near you. We've seen that now. We need to update this, and we have that under works. But this was looking at 93 to 2017. And we looked at the most populous 100 cities in the country. And overall, freeway capacity grew 42%. Population grew 32%, and congestion grew 144%. So, math that out for me to show me where the congestion ends and how much that will cost. And what's interesting is we see this no matter what kind of community you're talking about. We saw traffic go up in all 100 areas, and by a lot. So if you jump to the next slide, we see congestion. So, you've got a Nashville where you basically kept pace with population growth and 329% increase in traffic congestion. Same thing in San Diego. Pensacola, they got way ahead. They built way more new capacity than their growth in population. Huge explosion in congestion. And worst, you've got on the next slide, we have communities that have lost population or stayed about even. And they have massive increases in congestion. So the U.S. transportation approach has pioneered a way to move fewer people more slowly with more spending and more capacity.
Right.
And that is the excuse for not making things safer, for not paying to maintain what we already have, is we've got to deploy this absolute failure of an approach to reduce congestion. And it is a failure.
Yeah. And it's what's funny, not funny, haha, funny, tragic in a sense, is that, even this concept of focusing in on and perseverating over congestion is kind of the wrong metric anyways, when the solution is the automobile, and the solution of the automobile and the congestion is to try to build more capacity and more lanes, which due to induced demand just means more and more cars. And so it's fundamentally even the wrong metric to be looking at, if what we're trying to do is create vitality and prosperity and vibrancy and enhance quality of life. We want to rewind back to what we were talking about before of mobility, freedom, and independence and choice. That's what we really need to be focusing in on.
Well, and going back to what is typical, like the purpose of the transportation system is to connect people to jobs and essential services.
Right.
It's helping young Beth Osborne in law school reach that job, and without me having to pay a cover charge to enter into the economy. And if you look at the measures we use, they're 1950s measures. And even in the 1950s, if you read academic studies on what we should be measuring, it was whether or not people can get to things, which is not just speed, it's speed and distance. But we didn't have the capacity to run those numbers for millions of potential trips between, a nearly unlimited set of origins and destinations. So what we did, which was smart, is we said we're adding an amenity, that is this highway system, and we're going to speed up traffic. Does increasing that speed with everything else remaining the same save time? Can we use that as a proxy? Sure. The problem is the way we increased speeds was we cut off other travel, and we made those trips impossible or longer by a long shot. And we took away, while we were giving new ways of travel, we swept away other ways of travel.
Like we also swept away ability to travel for kids in particular, and for non-drivers in particular. So we for all ages and abilities, we took away that ability to be able to walk and bike to meaningful destinations, use transit, throughout the community. And so, we honed in on mobility options if you're a driver, but for everybody else, good luck.
But now we do know how to measure these things. I mean, in my handy dandy little hand computer here, I can determine how to get to every potential destination. I can also do a search for what are all the restaurants around here, and how far are they, and how can I travel to every one of them? We could do that. The state of Virginia has actually been doing that as a way to measure how well their transportation system is working for 10 years now. And they actually prioritize their investments based on whether or not the project increases access to the destination, not just whether it made the traffic go faster. Because where traffic goes faster, sometimes it's connecting you to areas that don't have many destinations as a new development area, or the way you're doing it is you're cutting off other trips. And also, think about that roadway where you have no left turn signs all the way down the roadway. That is because allowing people to take a left-hand turn results in queuing, which results in congestion. And so you get rid of that, and on that roadway, it means that there's more free-flowing trips. But it means when you have to take a left, you now have to take at least 3 rights. In spite of the fact that that costs you time, we get to count it as a time savings because the speed went up, and we just consider it, if the speed went up, everyone saved time. And that's not true. If we actually measure the way Virginia is measuring, the way we measure trips using our phones when we schedule our own trips or map out our own trips, we could actually find out if we're saving people real time, and we could do it by all modes of travel, which means we could look and see if we're increasing people's access, whether they're children or seniors or maybe lower income households that don't have access to one vehicle per person over 16, and have really meaningful measures of actual mobility and actual transportation results, even if you don't want to get to the businesses around there, which will also do better.
Yeah, yeah. Again, your website is the number 4america.org. And I notice that we do have, if we click over here, we've got, insights and resources. Real quickly, because I see some things that we have out here. We've got the blog and we've got other resources and insights here. Please address really, really briefly as we bring this to a close, the insanity that's happening right now with regards to at the federal level. In the weeks leading up to our recording session here, just so much is changing, and it's changing literally every day, sometimes by the hour. So it's too volatile to actually say anything meaningful that we know that this is going to happen for the future. But yeah, we see all sorts of really, really crazy stuff that is happening, emphasis on the crazy, including something that I think came out yesterday, which is, a platform position of resisting any travel lanes or parking lanes for cars being converted into any other mode of travel. So again, we don't need to, because even by the time this comes out in like a couple of weeks, something's going to be changing. But any wisdom, since you've been in DC for so long, is how do we weather through the insanity and the dynamic nature of what we're going through right now?
So I think chaos is right. A lot of announcements have been made and then backed off of. So nothing is permanent. And there are many things that this administration has allowed to continue. Some TA programs have continued for localities. I have not seen big delays on new transit projects yet. The last Trump administration did, so we'll see. They seem to have it out more fikes than for transit, but we'll see on that. Early days.
It's those evil bicyclists.
I know. It's nothing worse than a kid on a bike going to school, I guess.
I guess, yeah.
But I think there are a couple things to keep in mind. One is we should not take any announcement as permanent. This administration has shown themselves flexible in backing off of things that they have put out. But also, it's super important that people are in constant touch with their congressional delegation when their projects are in jeopardy. If you have a Republican member of Congress, they are speaking up on your behalf. They might not be going straight to the presses, but they are reaching out, and it is making a difference. I think the last thing I want people to think about is we have a program. We talked about the spending, but we didn't talk as much about where the money comes from. And it theoretically comes from the gas taxes you pay. When you buy gasoline, 18.4 cents per gallon is charged as a federal gas tax. And if you buy diesel, then it's 24.4 cents. And then you pay some tire taxes and a handful of other taxes that come into this trust fund. And it means transportation agencies, when you have a user fee like that pays for your program, you don't have to go through the annual appropriations process, that annual fight to make sure your program gets the money it needs. And that gives some stability so you can plan these big projects. However, the user fee has not covered the cost of the program since 2009 because we haven't raised the user fees since 1993. People love to claim it's fuel efficiency. That's not really the issue because people have driven more to help cover the gap. So we're just taking your time and energy away as opposed to having your vehicle burn more gasoline. But the other thing is all of this chaos you're talking about means that projects are being halted at random points, and project sponsors are being asked to rescope their project to get rid of undesirable elements. And so if we don't have the funding to justify the stability, and we don't have the stability to justify the stability, isn't it time to walk away from the trust fund and just make this a program like education, housing, or any other program that has to fight for its funding annually? And considering the fact that one of the reasons you do it annually is to have oversight over the administration to see what they're doing with the funding, Wouldn't we want that to be annual, considering that they're digging into projects that were supposed to move forward months ago? I would argue yes. I think it's probably time to move beyond that trust fund and treat transportation like any other program.
Yeah. And let's face it, it's time to actually acknowledge that the interstate system is pretty much built out, and we don't need to be adding more lane miles. What we really need to be doing is investing in those options, as we talked about earlier. Beth Osborne, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much. I know we could continue for hours and hours and hours, but I need to turn you loose to your day. Exactly.
No, this was fun, and I really do hope people go dig through the website. Please email me and tell me all the problems you find so that we can fix it. Let me know what works on your browser and what doesn't, and tell me what we should do next.
Yeah, and again,
thank you so much for having me.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Beth. And until next time, thank you so much for joining me on the Active Towns podcast.
It was fun.
Again, thank you all so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Beth Osborne. If you did, please, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, and share it with a friend. And if you haven't done so already, be honored to have you subscribe to the channel. Just click on the subscription button down below and be sure to turn on all notifications. And if you are enjoying this content here on the Active Towns channel, again, please consider supporting my efforts by becoming an Active Towns ambassador. Super easy to do. You can click on the join button here on YouTube or leave YouTube super thanks tip. Or if you would like, you can head on over to activetowns.org, click on the support tab at the top of the page. There's several different options, including becoming a Patreon supporter. Patrons do get early and ad-free access to all this video content, as well as making a donation to the nonprofit or buy me a coffee, several different options. Again, head on over to activetowns.org, click on that support tab at the top of the page. Again, thank you all so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. And until next time, this is John signing off by wishing you much activity, health, and happiness. Cheers.
And again, just want to send a huge thank you to all my Active Towns ambassadors supporting the channel financially via YouTube memberships, YouTube super thanks, as well as making contributions to the nonprofit and joining my Patreon. Every little bit adds up and is very much appreciated. Thank you all so much.